What are Cormac McCarthy's hardest books? Because, of course, there are books like The Road that are very accessible to people like Oprah or first time readers. But there are other McCarthy novels that, if you are just getting back into reading or don't understand the Southern Gothic style, you will most likely fail or have no idea what the hell is going on when you are reading it. And so I hope in today's video to show you what I have learned from helping hundreds of people read Cormac McCarthy novels. Because since the age of 14, I've been telling anyone that would listen, dude, you got to read Cormac McCarthy. And if they were reluctant, I'd be like, I'll read it with you. Just let's read 30 pages at a time and talk about it, then go forward. I also run a Cormac McCarthy course and book club where I help people understand and comprehend these works. So I hopefully have a good grasp on these rankings. And I have also read all of Cormac McCarthy's works at least 6 or 7 times at minimum, and up to 20 times for things I've had to work out in the Cormac McCarthy course. And what can make Cormac McCarthy difficult is that David Foster Wallace once said that McCarthy had the entire Oxford English Dictionary memorized. And the Oxford English Dictionary isn't a singular dictionary. It's a set of 20 dictionaries that are the size of a normal dictionary that catalog really every single word in the English language, especially British English, which most American English speakers like myself are very ignorant of. And this 20 volume set of dictionaries is now out of print and costs over $1,000 on Amazon to get the full set. And that's like a bucket list item, I'm sure, for all big readers out there. I'll put it in the link down. I'll put a link down in the description below so you can see it. Obviously, unless you are balling out, you're not going to be buying it. But let us start first with McCarthy's novel that brought him into stardom, which is All the Pretty Horses. And McCarthy made a deliberate shift to writing easier works after writing Blood Meridian. Because as I've said before, imagine writing Blood Meridian. Imagine spending a decade writing that book and you only get a couple thousand dollars for writing it. You would probably be like, what the hell am I doing with my time? I write one of the greatest novels in American history. It gets no recognition. I get no money. What's the point? And so McCarthy switched editors, took part in a marketing campaign that framed him and branded him as something that he wasn't, so that the common everyday reader, including up until today, because most people's perception of McCarthy is still formulated by that original branding. And a brand is literally like a brand, a cow brand. They put a brand on him and it's stuck on for decades now. And in the first 6 months, All the Pretty Horses sold 200,000 copies. And that's why All the Pretty Horses is going to be down here in the green section. And eventually this will fill in and you will see kind of the ordering of the rankings. But All the Pretty Horses is relatively a very easy novel. The hardest part about All the Pretty Horses is the untranslated Spanish. And there are guides online now and websites that basically you should have on your phone if you're reading a paperback copy, and you can just look and read what is being said. And back in 2007, when I first read this novel, I didn't have that resource. So I still have the copy. I copied down all the words I didn't know in Spanish because I was taking Spanish in school at the time and had a decent grasp at it. And so that was super fun. There are some scenes in All the Pretty Horses, not to spoil anything, but there are some esoteric things. For instance, one of the characters gets raped, one of the main characters. But that's not spoiling anything because 99% of the people that read All the Pretty Horses didn't realize that happened. You have to, read it a certain way and find certain symbols to be able to get that message. But that doesn't really, impact the story, and it doesn't increase its difficulty. All the Pretty Horses is just a typical Bildungsroman coming-of-age story, but it's cowboy style, and it has elevated language from McCarthy. But it's nothing that we haven't seen before. Like, if a coming-of-age story is too complicated, then no one's necessarily going to want to read it. It is supposed to be a little bit more palatable for a wider audience. And for people who say that McCarthy wasn't trying to be more marketable, there was the discussion in the late 1980s about what book they should publish first, because the Border trilogy is a trilogy, and it doesn't really matter if you read The Crossing or All the Pretty Horses first. And so McCarthy and his editor and his new company were looking at both books. And of course, they were going to pick All the Pretty Horses because, as we're going to discuss in a little bit, The Crossing is more difficult, longer, doesn't have a nice romantic arc and like things like that. So All the Pretty Horses, I would say, is one of the more accessible Cormac McCarthy novels, and I think everyone should read it. That doesn't lessen its merit. Sometimes that's equated to that. A lot of people overlook All the Pretty Horses because of these things, but if you start going deeper into the story and connect with it, McCarthy has a lot of commentary on parental trauma and death. There's even like hints of Gnosticism and stuff in there. And so it's not to be taken lightly for sure. And so next on our list, we have the elusive Orchard Keeper, which is the least read Cormac McCarthy novel, and it is also his most difficult. And I personally know this because this week we are starting the Orchard Keeper book club. I run a Cormac McCarthy book club. We are currently reading Blood Meridian and the Orchard Keeper. Both of those are starting this week. If you want to hop in and discuss those books with me and others, the link is down in the description below. I also have a 10-hour Orchard Keeper course, and I'm working on a 100-hour Blood Meridian course. The Blood Meridian course has about 4 hours done right now. But while working on the Orchard Keeper course, I reread the book at least 15 times, and I had read it multiple times earlier in my life because McCarthy is deliberately esoteric, makes it deliberately hard. And this is stemming from his early ego. When he first sent it to Random House, they sent him a letter back. And I read this letter in the archive, and they're like, hey man, this was great. Like, we would love to get a contract going, like stuff like this. But, we want to start making some changes, as we're working that out. I know it might take a while for you to respond. Can you clarify some of this? And he responds, and instead of saying like, oh my God, yeah, like let's get a deal going. Yeah, send me some money, like probably many of us would. He said back, well, he wrote back this long letter refuting every single thing they said. And he said, everything in this novel is already perfect. And eventually, through push and pull and years of editing, they formed the novel into what it is now, which is still a very difficult novel. And this past weekend, I was talking to one of the members of the Cormac McCarthy Course and book club, and I also host daily office hours. So if you can't make the book club call every week, I host office hours at different times from 6, sometimes at 5 in the morning, sometimes at 8 at night, so that all time zones are covered at least once all throughout the week. And while discussing this with one of the members, he had started reading The Orchard Keeper to get ahead of the book club just to see what it was like. And he had missed a lot of the major plot points. Like when we were discussing what was going on, the 5 major things that happened in the first 50 pages blew right by his head. And he is a very good reader. I have talked to him before. I know how he thinks, and it isn't his fault. I was the same way. That's why when I started the Orchard Keeper course and I started reading it and starting to work on the content, I was like, oh my God, this is going to take forever. There are multiple times in the course where I have the camera zoomed out and I have to read word by word the fight scenes. Like, you could read through some of the scenes in The Orchard Keeper and not realize a fight is going on because of how weirdly McCarthy is describing it with like esoteric words. And it just happens out of nowhere with no warning, or car crashes or random things. You're like, dude, did that just happen? And so like I have to explain like word by word, like I'm doing like, it's like I'm back in jiu-jitsu again. And I'm like, he moves his left arm over here and then they're clashing like this. And what really finalizes this point, in 1963 when it was published, the reviewers back then, who were much more intelligent than we are now, people who were reading Faulkner, who was just about to die, Flannery O'Connor, all the modernist writers that were much harder, they said this was hard and like kind of not easy to understand. But it isn't without merit. And maybe it's just the inordinate amount of time I've spent with The Orchard Keeper. But I feel like I cracked the code of the novel, and it contains in it more autobiographical secrets and theories and thoughts that Cormac has, and a lot of the things that he explores in there branch out to the other novels. And it's his biggest attempt at postmodernism. I won't spoil anything, but the novel is framed and written in a way, once you understand how it was written, to make it hard, to make it like a fever dream or these types of things. But when we look at someone like a Cormac McCarthy, we don't assume that from him. You don't assume a novel about an orchard keeper that's 93 years old is going to be McCarthy's memento back to the time when he lived in San Francisco and was taking acid and watching Jack Kerouac and Gary Snyder and other beat writers speak at City Light Books. Like, you don't really think that. And as we go on down the list, that's what makes a book easier a lot of the time, because there is a reward at the end of at the tunnel, even if it is a little bit harder. If you see that it's valuable, that it can change your life, that it means something, then you're going to be more invested in it. And I think a perfect example of this is Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian, because it isn't necessarily a hard novel, but it actually is. A lot of us, and some of you guys can attest to this, maybe you haven't read since high school. I have a lot of students. I am a high school teacher right now. And if it wasn't for me, and they complained about this, like this past year, I had freshmen, non-honors, and I made them read 4 books. Like we did 4 books, and the selection at our school library for class sets isn't the greatest. And they are 14-year-olds who were in the COVID era and like missed a year or two of reading. So, it was hard to find books that were like super enjoyable for them. But I've taught at 4 schools now, during my tenure as a teacher. And I've known plenty of teachers or plenty of kids who go throughout their whole high school experience and they don't even read a book, or maybe do 1 book and they don't even read it. And I specifically structured my class in a way that if you didn't read the book and comprehend the book, like we would do daily quizzes, like you would show up and we would read, and then you could look at the book and study for 10 minutes. And then we were writing and taking a quiz on it. No chat GPT, no nothing. Like we read and then we talk about it and take a quiz on it. And that wasn't very popular, but that was the only way I could guarantee that a lot of the kids were reading, because eventually kids would see their grades plummet and be like, oh God, I actually have to read this thing. But when you have teachers who don't do that, then kids can squeak through high school, even college. I know a guy, I won't say his name. He got a master's degree in English and then a PhD in educational law and never read a book. For a lot of his courses, he hired someone to take the courses for him. He would do it online or just have them do the homework for him. He would find professors that just, did essays. He just had to show up to class, no quizzes, and he would have someone else write all the stuff for him. His thesis was written by someone else. You can pass classes without reading the books, especially now with ChatGPT and online stuff, or hiring people to do your stuff. Most people I know don't read the books in their college classes, especially if they, that isn't their chosen major. And so a lot of people come back to reading or come back into Blood Meridian from Windy Goon or just whatever. And, they can fall into my videos and get into the funnel, and they step into Blood Meridian, and it's not the most straightforward novel. Obviously, it's written in third person omnipotent, and the kid, as we talked about in the Harold Bloom video yesterday, kind of moves in and out of the center. There really is not a strong plot, not strong characterization. And not until page 67 or 68 is there a major action scene with the Comanche attack. I won't spoil anything. The Comanche attack's obviously very famous, but it takes a while to get there. And up until then, people are just wandering around. And a lot of people can't handle the sections that are between the action. I've heard people talk about reading Blood Meridian online that aren't literary people, and they loathe those middle sections. They loathe when McCarthy is going on rants about the environment, or the kid is walking around in the desert, and then there's the burning bush. There's like that section kind of near the end where there's kind of wandering by certain characters for 10, 20 pages at a time, and like that lull is hard on people. But I think we'll have to see. This may move down a category or move over a little bit. I'm going to put 2 on each row because the action does carry it. There are other novels that we're about to talk about that are harder than Blood Meridian. And one of those novels is The Crossing. And The Crossing is about 10,000 more words than Blood Meridian. And the action isn't necessarily there. We do open in The Crossing with a beautiful exchange with Billy Parham and a wolf, and like all the tragedy and stuff that goes into that. But then the rest of the novel is mostly riding in Mexico. There isn't as much active tension as All the Pretty Horses with, the law and characters and fights. I mean, there is things that happen and there are the rises, but when we look at All the Pretty Horses word count, and excuse me, I was wrong. I just wanted to recheck. Don't worry, guys. This channel isn't perfect. I make mistakes all the time. A lot of these other booktubers, they are perfect and they have the perfect bookshelf behind them. Like, no, guys, I mess up all the time, and I don't care about editing it out because I want this to feel like a lecture. This is how I talk to my students. I'm messing stuff up all the time. That's actually a preview. This coming year, I'm going to film my daily lectures because I speak for 5 or 10 minutes, and it's like a fire video. It's a fire lecture on some aspect of writing. I'm going to, at lunch every single day, bring my camera and film what I say to my classes every single day because I'm going to be teaching some higher levels, and then be posting that stuff so you can kind of see my teaching style. But what I was wrong about, is that The Crossing is 34,000 words longer than Blood Meridian, which is significant, and 50,000 words longer than All the Pretty Horses. So that's huge. I mean, that's a third bigger. That's an extra at least 100 pages between All the Pretty Horses and The Crossing. And The Crossing also features, maybe more so than any other Cormac McCarthy novel, Suttree could get thrown into this category, but side quests, side stories. Like you're talking to a priest, you're talking to a group of gypsies, you're hearing, there's a family that's talking. There's more Spanish dialogue, obviously because of the length, than All the Pretty Horses or any other Cormac McCarthy novel. So it is pretty difficult. And so we are going to place that in front of Blood Meridian for now. It could move up here. We're going to have to see exactly where the final rankings stand. But a lot of people get bored of The Crossing. The Crossing isn't necessarily hard. Like to actually read it and sit down and be, okay, I'm going to get through this. Maybe not the hardest thing in the world, but a lot of us aren't accustomed to kind of that dragged out plot line, the descriptions of nature, these types of things. That's why The Crossing is personally my favorite Cormac McCarthy novel, but others may not feel the same. So next on the list, we have Suttree, and this one's going to be hard. I'm going to place it here for now. It may move up into the next category. Actually, I would say so, because Suttree is Cormac McCarthy's longest novel, coming in at a whopping 176,000 words, which is 60,000 more words than Blood Meridian and 25,000 more words than The Crossing. And what can make Suttree hard for a lot of people is that the plot never really gets going. And a quick no spoiler analysis of Suttree. It's about a man who lives on a houseboat in downtown Knoxville in the 1950s, early 1950s. And it's just a collection of stories. It's autobiographical. This character has father trauma, has rich parents, and he's rejected that lifestyle, and he's living here. And he's got a wild group of friends, and there's wild stories, there's mystical elements, but you just kind of are moving through this story. And there's all these false starts of characterization. Like you would think across 176,000 words that we would see this classic character art. We would see a plot. But McCarthy refuses to do that, especially in a lot of his early novels. There is no real, classic narrative elements. And McCarthy is on fire with his use of esoteric words in this book. He, once again, at times, much like The Orchard Keeper, because Suttree was the first novel he ever started working on and then gave up to work on The Orchard Keeper. There are times where things just don't make sense unless you really read into it. You could read a whole section and think something totally else happened. And you start to kind of lose track of a lot of the experiences, and some of the stories start referencing back, or some of these characters start coming back 80,000 words later. And it can start to add up a little bit. I know a lot of people who have failed to read Suttree. I mean, my sister, who I did a podcast with on the show, who is very smart, also a fellow teacher. She has a master's degree. She has read plenty of hard books. She just didn't DNF this one. She just couldn't get into it. And that's surprising because I think she's read I would say she's read almost every other Cormac McCarthy novel except maybe 2 others in Suttree, so 9 out of 12. And my advice, if you're going to read Suttree, is you're just going to have to get into it. Like I said, to get these characters, you're going to have to get 80, 90,000 words in, and then it's all going to start to make sense. You hopefully are going to be able to see the light of Suttree and what McCarthy's trying to show that he represents. So you'll have to take it slow. I mean, it is not necessarily difficult. It's intuitive. There's a lot of banter. There's a lot of stuff like in bars or stuff like that. And that's cool. And that helps you get to know the characters a lot easier than something like The Orchard Keeper or some of the other things we're going to talk about. But just the sheer length alone, especially for new readers, can be hard. And a lot of people hear that Suttree is the best of the Southern novels. And I would probably agree. It is for sure the best of the Southern novels. But I don't know if that's where you should start with the Southern novels, because it's a gargantuan book. What was at least 400 pages plus. So next on the list, we have Cities of the Plain, and I'm going to put this one right here. And what makes Cities of the Plain kind of interesting and hard is that it's not a hard novel, much like the whole Border trilogy. But in 1976, McCarthy started, and I think completed in 1978, he started a screenplay called Cities of the Plain. And then he put that away for a while. This was in his screenwriting phase. And eventually, when he was thinking of ideas for kind of this new marketable direction that he wanted to go, he had these 2 characters, Billy Parham and John Grady Cole from The Crossing, and he was like, okay, I'm actually going to write 2 prequel books about them. I feel like this has some legs here, and then we're going to bring them together. But when he started composing Cities of the Plain, I've read the original Cities of the Plain manuscript. It the first 70% of the novel, 80% of the novel is really just a transference of the screenplay. And that's why I think it falls flat for a lot of people, in that McCarthy didn't necessarily put the same amount of effort in as an original work. It was almost like he was adapting his own work. But then suddenly at the end of the novel, things kind of take a weird turn and it becomes better because he's originally writing it in the mid 1990s at that point. And so I think that that's interesting, and that's what makes it a little bit more difficult than All the Pretty Horses. It isn't as readable, but it's shorter than both the other Border Trilogy books, and it kind of falling flat does make it a little bit easier because it's easier also in the sense, talking about wanting to finish novel. Blood Meridian is somewhat easy because you want to finish it. You want to see what happens. It pulls you through it. And Cities of the Plain is the same because you want to see what happens at the end of the trilogy. You've connected to Billy Parham and John Grady Cole, and you're like, okay, I love these guys. Like, what's happening? Like, what's going to finally happen? And that takes you to the end much easier. So next on the list, we have Child of God. And I'm going to surprisingly place Child of God down here because Child of God is a whopping 35,000 pages, everybody. And yes, it was a cash grab by McCarthy. When people ask, like, I think it's a good novel. I like the novel. It's better than most other novels I read. But it's my least favorite Cormac McCarthy novel because when I look at it, it was as cash grabby as McCarthy ever got. Even though later on in his career he adapted his style, it started off as an offshoot of Outer Dark, like the original plot line and what he started seeing. But he wanted to get it signed a multi-book deal to have more money, so he signed a book deal that would extend through Child of God and Suttree, and maybe even Blood Meridian, if I remember correctly. And he wanted to get advances for both books immediately because he was like starving, and him and his wife needed money. And there were murders, I think, in the there were murders, the Lula Lake murders of 1963 that inspired Child of God. And so he had a storyline. He had kind of this separate plot line that connects, that helped build the world of Child of God. And then he just heard this big story that happened a couple hours from his house in northwestern Georgia on the border of Tennessee and Georgia, these Lula Lake murders that are very similar to what happens in Child of God. So it's just an adaptation, once again, of kind of these events. And when it comes in at 36,000 words, what's weird about Child of God is like they extended the book. Like when you read it, I could go pull it up. They make it appear like it's a real novel, but there are so many pages that are like, just blank again, blank page. Before that, blank pages. Like there's so much like filler that happens to make this feel like a real novel. And so, that's what makes it fun because it's not hard to read. I could sit down. 35,000 words. You could sit down and read this in a sitting. Honestly, if you wanted to, if you had the endurance, and most of you guys do. And so I think that's what makes it popular. I think that's why it's his most popular Southern novel. Child of God, when you look at how many people have read it in book sales, is one of McCarthy's most popular novels because it has the word God in it. So all 62% of Americans are Christian, so they obviously resonate with that and think about that. And most of us, if we're not a part of that 62%, rejected Christianity, and we want to see McCarthy's interpretation of that, and we think there's going to be an analysis of God or religion in the book, and there slightly is, but it's really just, at the start of the novel when they say he's a child of God, that's where the title comes from. So I think my analysis here is wrong, honestly. I'm going to put Child of God down here. Like, seeing that it's 35,000 words and the trickery going into that, we're going to lay that down here for now. We'll maybe be able to work that out some more. So next on our list is Outer Dark. And interestingly enough, Outer Dark is going to need to come to the top of this list because Outer Dark has a lot of elements that make it more esoteric. It's one of McCarthy's only novels that we have no idea where it's taking place. We do know it's in Appalachia probably, but we don't know the time period. We don't know the place. We can make assumptions, but he makes a lot of that very vague. And it's a road novel. McCarthy is known to write, not like The Road. The Road does count in a road novel, but a road novel is just a bunch of people walking, like the Lord of the Rings. But in The Road, they walk around. In Outer Dark, it's just about a brother and sister who had an incestuous baby, and they're walking around. The whole Border trilogy is a bunch of riding and walking around. Like, anyway, he loves to do that. But Outer Dark is the slowest of all because they're literally walking. They are on the road too, but there's actually some like big events going on. Like there's always that looming threat of cannibalism or like what's going to happen next. And like, yeah, like that's cool. But in Outer Dark, none of that anticipation is there. Outer Dark features little to no villains. There is a group of villains called the Triune, but they don't appear in most of the novel. They have, less than 10 pages at most of actual, page time in the book. So the rest of the novel is mostly just wandering and just like living a country life. And once again, it's not necessarily hard, but McCarthy is still connected to some of the esoteric language that he was using in The Orchard Keeper. He is very Gnostic about this novel. I mean, Outer Dark is, I would say, probably one of Cormac McCarthy's most Gnostic novels. There is a bunch of symbolism and metaphor and like all this stuff that he's like putting in there and veiling. And having helped people through this, my wife actually just read Outer Dark. There can be confusion. There was times where she'd be like, what the hell just happened? And I'd have to rearrange things. And once again, my wife, who is a very strong reader for my account, and including myself, when I've read this before and I'm working on an Outer Dark course right now, that one's only, I think, 3 hours or so right now too. And that, that's what's funny about that one, is that I was working on the Outer Dark course for a while, and I was like rereading it, and I'm like, I want to do the Blood Meridian course. Like, I gave up. I was like, I'm going to continue doing this, but I can't sit here and spend 4 months just on this book like I did The Orchard Keeper, because I don't have it in me again. I want to focus on the Western works for a while. Like, I can't, I'm here in the West right now. I'm here in Tucson. I do want to go to Tennessee, but like, I want to put 100 hours into a Border Trilogy course and a Blood Meridian course and finish the Outer Dark course before I go back to the Southern Gothic novels, because there are lulls in the book. There are good moments, let me tell you guys, in Outer Dark that are fun. But sometimes they're 20 or 30 pages where it's nothing but just talking and walking and going to stores. And you're like, damn it. But that's somewhat realistic. So next on the list, we have No Country for Old Men, which comes in once again as a very short novel. And if you kind of look, McCarthy's last 3 books. So we have Cities of the Plain, 90,000 words, No Country for Old Men, 70,000 words, and then The Road coming in at 58,000 words. So we kind of see a decline, and I can understand that because, and what's interesting, at the end of his career, we hear about McCarthy's productivity and stuff, but I don't necessarily see that. I mean, he really did get old and slow down, because Cities of the Plain was an adaptation of a screenplay from the 70s. No Country for Old Men was an adaptation of a screenplay from the 70s. The Passenger, he started that in 1961, so it took him 60 years to get that one out. And there were already drafts of that in the 1980s, so it's like, that's not some revolutionary thing. And then The Road was written faster than McCarthy had written any other novel. I think he wrote like the first draft or something in a couple weeks and spent some time editing and stuff. But it was his fastest first draft to publication ever. I mean, by far. Which, I'm kind of like resentful, I guess, at the Santa Fe Institute, because I'm like, guys, you took away so much good time from us. Like, if McCarthy could sit and belt out The Road in a year, how much more could we have got? And I know we got some screenplays and some stuff, and I know that he didn't like writing, as I'm going to talk about in another video I'm going to post soon. He only did writing. He didn't like writing. But No Country for Old Men is not a hard novel. There are some things that are challenging. There are the dream scenes and sequences, but it does have a villain. It does have a plot. It does have characterization with Sheriff Bell, some of the more classical elements available. And that's what makes it pretty easy. I don't think it's as easy. I think it's a little bit more difficult than Child of God for sure. But No Country for Old Men was the first Cormac McCarthy book I ever read at 14 years old. I saw the movie in 2007 in theaters, and I was like, oh shit. And my school library, shout out Shadow Ridge High School, for some reason had McCarthy's entire bibliography at that time. Shout out to that librarian. And so then I read that one first, and I was like, damn, this was great. And and it's so funny because I talk about the books I read when I was 13 and 14. And people are like, there he goes, bragging again about the books he read. Like, guys, I wasn't a fucking genius. Like, I'm a teacher now. I was failing classes in high school. I failed classes in college. Partially because of my own intelligence, but mostly because of my own care. But I didn't grow up a reader. I didn't come from a house that encouraged heavy reading or writing or any analysis on that end. So at 14 years old, I was, by an adult standard or by any standard, a below average reader. So I think that's a testament to how easy the novel is. That's what's so funny about people. Like, you feel people's own resentment and anger, like when you hear comments like that. You're like, damn, like, calm down. That energy reminds me, I had a teacher in high school, and he honestly wasn't good. He thought he was hot shit, but like looking back now, like, he wasn't good. And one time he pulled me out of class because I was always causing a ruckus and arguing and stuff. He's like, you think you're the first person to read Eastern philosophy and, the Russians and all this stuff. You think you're the only person in the world, don't you? I was like, I'm the only person in this classroom because I know you haven't. I know they haven't. I know the other 3,000 kids at the school most likely haven't. So yeah, I'm going to act like no one knows because no one knows. And if I don't spread the word, then no one's going to know. They're not going home on MySpace or whatever the fuck that we were using back then and checking out Camus. You have to get told by someone. That's how I got into all this. I was told by someone, yo, you should read this. I was told by my dad, yo, there's, that McCarthy guy we saw that movie for, or that movie, that there's a novel for that. Like, you should go see if the library has that. I was told these things. And so, yes, I am going to be excited. Yes, maybe it's a little bit arrogant, but that's what we need. People, imagine being, how good it would be if kids were arrogant about books and their knowledge instead of clothes, or how many people they've had sex with, or their bench, or their, how much money they have, or whatever, or if, like, for the weird kids, how good they are at video games, like whatever dumb metric they are doing. Imagine if knowledge, or like even love, or spirituality was like the measure that people were measuring themselves as, even as adults. All right, so next on the list, we have The Passenger, which comes in at 120,000 words. And I'm going to put The Passenger up here because I knew, and maybe we're just dumb now, but I knew a lot of people who struggled with finishing The Passenger, because the first 100 to 120 pages of The Passenger is not easy, because we have the sections with the thalidomide kid in italics that sometimes just go on for pages, or are like super weird. And so that creates a lot of problems for a lot of readers, because once you kind of get over that hump, I feel like the rest of The Passenger reads as easy as the Border trilogy, but kind of the start, and once again, the priming effect and how people walk into it really screwed a lot of people up. And so The Passenger is going to rank pretty high. Next on the list, we have Stella Maris. And I guess we're going to have to do some adjustments here, because I would say Stella Maris is one of the easier works. It's just dialogue. It's pretty easy. It's short. Gotta be shorter than the 35,000 words of Child of God. They do talk about esoteric things, but you kind of are moved through it because you want to know more knowledge. You want to know more about Alicia and Bobby's relationship. And some of that is sprinkled in throughout the novel. And so I would say it's it's probably his easiest work by far. And last but not least, we have The Road, which I am going to place second to last. And The Road comes in at 58,000 words. And I think it's easier than Child of God because it has less esoteric language. It's a more complete narrative. It's not as weird. It has more anticipation, and you want to be pulled through the work more. And so that's why I would put that right there. So these are my rankings, everybody. Once again, if you want to join the Cormac McCarthy course, the Cormac McCarthy book club, we also have a writing group where I am releasing poems every single day, a weekly prose piece. There are other people participating in that challenge. We've had a couple so far. There's a ton of cool stuff over there. I'll put the link down in the description below. If you want my free PDF on Cormac McCarthy's 144 favorite books and authors, I'll put that down there too. You probably already have that. And I will see you guys in the next video.